In the vast outback of Western Australia, a tale of revenge unfolded that would shake the nation to its core. It began with a single gunshot in a town of just 50 people and ended with a car bomb that scattered debris across dozens of houses.
Without warning, after the hours of darkness, a couple of shots rang out in the night, and the bikies went straight to ground, hid behind trees, trying to establish what was happening and who was firing at them.
At the center of the storm stood Don Hancock, a decorated former police officer with 30 years of service, and the Gypsy Jokers, a notorious biker club with roots stretching back to 1969.
The most infamous of these crimes involved ex-Western Australian policeman Don Hancock and the Gypsy Jokers.
This is a story of 65 kilograms of stolen gold, a .303 rifle with 51 rounds of ammunition, and a bomb made from mining explosives hidden in a teenager's exhumed coffin. It's a tale that spans 11 months, from October 2000 to September 2001, leaving 2 men dead and a community forever changed. What drove a respected lawman to become a suspected killer? How did a biker club execute a revenge plot with military precision? And why, after 130 criminal charges and a high-profile trial, does justice still seem elusive? Prepare to delve into a world where the line between law and outlaw blurs, where $363,000 in cash and 3 kilograms of amphetamines are just the tip of the iceberg. This is the Hancock Affair, a true crime saga that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice in the outback.
We don't step aside from the fact that Don Hancock, from a police perspective, in that homicide investigation, was the principal person of interest. He was there, things had happened in the evening, and the investigation team had a clear focus on trying to work out whether he was responsible for that death or not.
Don Hancock was a name that commanded respect in Western Australia. Known as the Silver Fox, he had built a reputation as one of the most honored and respected policemen in the country. His career in law enforcement had been marked by high-profile cases, including the 1982 Perth mint swindle case, where he investigated the theft of 65 kilograms of gold.
Don Leslie Hancock, known as Don Hancock, was a Western Australian policeman. He was principally known for his involvement in the investigation of the Perth mint swindle and his death in a car bombing in 2001.
This case had acquired a legendary reputation in Australia and made Hancock into a local celebrity. After retiring from the police force in 1994, Hancock turned his attention to the small outback community of Orabanda.
Now, Don Hancock had been a detective commander in the CIB, the Criminal Investigation Branch in Western Australia, and he'd retired in 1994.
This former gold rush town, with a population of only about 50 people, became his domain. Hancock's family had deep roots in the area, dating back to the 1893 gold rush, and he felt a strong connection to this place he considered home.
It was in the heart of Western Australia's historic goldfields that this story came out of, and the tiny town site of Orabanda. That town emerged from the red dirt in around 1893, when gold was miraculously pulled up from that red dirt, hence the name, the Spanish for band of gold, Banda de Oro.
Through his company, Wentworth Holdings WA Pti Limited, Hancock came to dominate the local economy, owning the pub, trailer park, general store, and the historic Orabanda Inn. He also owned a gold concession called Grant's Patch, which contained a shack with a .303 rifle and 51 rounds of ammunition. On October 1st, 2000, Orabanda was bustling with tourists visiting the Orabanda Historical Inn. Hancock and his wife, Elizabeth, were expecting a busy day at the establishment. The atmosphere was lively, with the bar and beer garden full of patrons enjoying the sunny weather.
It was the night when Australia was to unite in celebration of the best Olympic Games ever, of the athletes of the country, the first day of October in the year 2000.
Among those present were 2 officers of the Western Australia Police who had driven out from Kalgoorlie to see Hancock, Senior Sergeant Kim Gage and Detective Senior Constable Sean Gartland. As the day progressed, at around noon, a group of motorcycles roared into town. The riders were members of the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club, a notorious club known for their violent reputation and criminal activities. The Gypsy Jokers had established their first Australian chapter in Melbourne in 1969.
And it's that third cohort of bikie that we're going to be talking about today, because we're talking about the Gypsy Joker Outlaw Motorcycle Club, which in the 1990s and 2000s was one of the most feared, secretive, powerful and bloodthirsty organised crime institutions in Australia.
Among them were Graham Slim Slater, William Joseph Billy Grierson, Sidney John Reed and others, all from the Kalgoorlie chapter. Hancock had long harbored disdain for outlaw motorcycle clubs, viewing them as criminal scumbags. The arrival of the Gypsy Jokers at his establishment filled him with anger, and tensions quickly escalated.
A handful of Gypsy Jokers had rolled into town in the early afternoon. They'd started drinking. I think there was about 6 of them. They had a few, and they started getting lippy, as bikies do when they've been drinking. And there was an argument between Don Hancock and these Gypsy Jokers, and the cause of the argument was one of them had mouthed off about a waitress or bartender who happened to be Don's daughter.
Don Hancock didn't like that, so he told them to quieten down. They were perhaps a bit belligerent, so he ordered them to leave and shut the pub.
As night fell on Ora Banda, the tensions that had been building throughout the day reached a boiling point. The Gypsy Jokers had set up a campfire near their campsite, under a giant banner that read Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club.
They set up camp a couple of 100 metres away, and they continued drinking.
Billy Grierson, unaware of the danger that lurked in the darkness, was among his fellow club members, enjoying what would tragically be his last moments. At approximately 7:45 p.m., the peaceful night was shattered by the crack of a rifle shot. The first shot seemed to startle the bikers, but they initially dismissed it as someone hunting kangaroos in the evening.
And at about 7:45 p.m. that same night, a sniper's bullet rang out across the Ora Banda racetrack, striking the campfire where the bikies were sitting.
However, about 15 minutes later, at around 7:55 p.m., a second shot rang out, this time finding its mark. Billy Grierson was struck by a bullet.
Then they heard a second shot, and they knew that they were actually being fired upon, so they all hit the deck. Billy Grierson caught that second bullet in his torso, and he started bleeding.
Slater later stated in a 2018 interview,
"I tell you one thing, he was a bloody good shot. It must have been 600 meters away in the dark."
Chaos erupted as the Gypsy Jokers realized what had happened. In a panic, they fled the scene with Grierson's body, making their way to the Cause nickel mine, located about 9 miles away. Upon arrival, they were informed by the mine's first aid post attendants that Grierson was indeed dead.
They rushed him onto a ute, I think it was, or maybe a flatbed truck that was in the area, and they drove him to a nearby nickel mine. It was the Cause nickel mine, I think, and by the time they got there, he'd actually bled out and he was dead.
In what appeared to be an attempt to protect their club's identity, the Gypsy Jokers removed Grierson's biker vest, which bore the Gypsy Joker patch and other identifying insignia, including badges decorated with the Iron Cross and a Nazi swastika. They also removed his belt, whose buckle was shaped in the patch of the Gypsy Jokers, before abandoning his body along a dirt road. As news of the shooting spread, suspicion quickly fell on Don Hancock. His earlier confrontation with the Gypsy Jokers, combined with his reputation as a tough former cop, made him an obvious suspect in the eyes of many.
The sniper shot to me was an incredible feat. I mean, the shooter used a high-powered rifle from a range of up to 300 meters in darkness and in difficult conditions. Now, it was never established whether the sniper meant to hit Mr. Grierson or if the shots were a warning to get the bikies to leave the small settlement. Nobody has ever been charged over Mr. Grierson's murder, and technically the case, dubbed Operation Sandalwoods, remains with the police cold case unit. But Mr. Hancock was long regarded as the prime suspect, and to me, I believe that he was the actual shooter.
However, proving his involvement would prove to be a challenging task for investigators. The police arrived at the scene to begin their investigation, but they faced numerous obstacles from the outset. Of the approximately 40 people present when Grierson was killed, Hancock was the only person who did not have an alibi for his whereabouts at the time of the murder. When questioned by Senior Constable Dave Roper, Hancock remained calm, but refused to answer any questions without his lawyer present. A computer search revealed that Hancock owned 3 rifles along with a shotgun. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this case would be far from straightforward. The murder weapon, believed to be a .303 rifle, was never found. The community of Ora Banda found itself divided, with loyalties tested as people grappled with the possibility that a respected former police officer might be involved in such a heinous crime. The stage was set for a long and complex investigation that would have far-reaching consequences for all involved. In the months following Billy Grierson's murder, tensions in Western Australia continued to simmer.
Silence upon silence. Police at the time had revealed very little about the circumstances of the execution of Billy Grierson. They said all angles needed to be investigated. They were hinted at they'd talk to every one of the 30 locals, and there was also even a whisper whether it was an inside job.
The Gypsy Jokers, known for their code of loyalty and retribution, were not about to let the death of one of their own go unpunished.
But it was obvious who the Gypsy Jokers believed had done it, even though they were also refusing to cooperate with the police and the state coroner in the investigation.
Meanwhile, Don Hancock, despite being the prime suspect in the eyes of many, remained free and seemingly untouchable. The investigation into Grierson's death was led by Detective Jack Lee, who had been brought in from Perth to take charge of the case. Lee was convinced of Hancock's guilt, but faced numerous challenges in proving it.
When the police got there, Don Hancock had had a shower. He changed his clothing from what he had been wearing when he was at the inn, when he closed it, and refused to hand over his clothing.
Hancock only spoke to investigators when his lawyer was present and demanded that questions be submitted in writing in advance. This approach, combined with the lack of physical evidence linking Hancock to the crime, made building a case against him extremely difficult.
Mr. Hancock, interestingly enough, was also described as being uncooperative with officers investigating the murder, and there were suggestions that he might have tried to neutralize any gunshot residue from his hands by eating an orange, as citrus juice is widely believed to affect gunshot residue. I don't know if that's true or not, that's just what has been stated.
As the police struggled to make progress in their investigation, the Gypsy Jokers took matters into their own hands. On October 13, 2000, they bombed the Ora Banda Historical Inn, nearly killing Hancock's son, Paul, who had been left in charge of the establishment. The bomb was made from power gel explosive, commonly used in the mining industry, along with PVC pipes and a fuse. It was placed inside a coffin, dug up from a graveyard in Kalgoorlie, that belonged to a teenage boy.
A week after that funeral, and 10 minutes after the Ora Banda Inn had shut its doors on a smattering of Friday night clients, a bomb went off. 2, in fact. One resting on a window of the pub and another near the front entrance. The historic inn was decimated, and the message had also been sent. The Jokers were not joking about revenge.
This was followed by another attack on November 1st, when 2 Gypsy Jokers, Graham Slim Slater and Sid Snot Reed, attempted to burn down Hancock's Ora Banda house using Molotov cocktails. The attacks culminated on November 5th, when the club returned to Ora Banda to bomb Hancock's house, the gold mill, and the inn, causing significant damage to all three properties. The explosion destroyed the 19th century gold crusher and the Crossley diesel motor that powered it.
In the coming weeks, more incendiary actions. Explosions at Hancock's Ora Banda home, the general store, the gold battery that he'd restored, and a caravan. Property by property, Ora Banda was literally being blown off the map. The Premier and the Police Commissioner at the time were obviously outraged, vowing unlimited resources to crack down on the crime spree. Even Billy Grierson's sister pleaded for the violence to end and pleaded for police to find her brother's killer. But she also didn't want her name published.
Realizing the danger he was in, Hancock relocated to Perth, hoping to escape the chaos that had engulfed his life since Grierson's murder. However, the Gypsy Jokers were not about to let him slip away so easily. Using inside information obtained from a female employee of the Western Australia Department of Transportation, the club was able to track down Hancock's new address on Enfield Street in Lathland. On September 1st, 2001, nearly a year after Grierson's death, the Gypsy Jokers' plan for revenge was set in motion. Don Hancock and his friend Lou Lewis attended an event at Ascot Racecourse, unaware of the danger that awaited them.
A year after the shooting, Don Hancock organised a day at the races with his mate Lou Lewis. A few beers and a bet.
On that day, at the Belmont Racecourse, there were other members of the Gypsy Jokers conducting surveillance on Don Hancock and Lou Lewis. They were watching to see their movements. Sid Reed and another senior member of the Gypsy Jokers.
As they returned to their vehicle after a long day at the races, tragedy struck. At approximately 5:35 p.m., as Lewis was parking his car in Hancock's driveway, a powerful car bomb planted by Gypsy Joker member Sid "Snot" Reed detonated beneath their vehicle with devastating force. The explosion rocked the quiet Perth street, instantly killing both Hancock and Lewis. The blast was so powerful that it severed Hancock into two, with his upper torso being blasted into his backyard.
Who had placed the bomb under the passenger seat had returned to their observation point at a nearby car park. At about 5:30, after the last race, Don Hancock and Lou Lewis drove the way back home, back to Lathland. By that time, Lou Lewis had driven the mere 2 to 3 kilometers back to Don Hancock's home, and they were in the process of just pulling onto the front verge when the power gel detonated, causing both of them to lose their life.
We were actually there when it happened. On the way home, I didn't hear anything, but apparently it was heard for miles. But I came up my down the row, I prayed, and went to turn into our street. And there were police cars and everything. It was chaotic. People all out on the street, and then I pulled around the corner, and I just knew something had happened.
Lewis's body remained intact, but the blast force destroyed his internal organs, killing him instantly. Detective Stephen Brown described the crime scene as a scene of devastation. The explosion was such that the materials, debris, and other items were strewn over dozens of houses to neighboring streets.
I read somewhere that they were still finding debris weeks later, and there was a piece of a motherboard or some sort of electronic from the car that they found wedged in some tiles in a pool about 400 meters away. So that's flown in and then gone. And so the force of this explosion, it could be heard kilometers away, and I mean, God knows what it must have been like if you were in one of the neighbors in that street that afternoon.
The brutal murder of Don Hancock and Lou Lewis sent shockwaves through Western Australia and beyond. The Gypsy Jokers had exacted their revenge in a spectacular and terrifying manner, demonstrating the lengths to which they were willing to go to avenge one of their own. The stage was now set for an intense investigation that would delve deep into the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs and challenge the very foundations of justice in Western Australia. The aftermath of Don Hancock's murder led to an extensive investigation dubbed Operation Zircon by Western Australian police forces.
It was a very, very tense situation, and nothing like we had seen in modern Western Australia. This kind of thing didn't happen. Cops or retired cops just didn't get shot. They didn't get blown up. No one messed with the boys in blue. This was the kind of thing that you'd see in Mexico, in Colombia, not in a first world country like in Australia.
Detectives worked tirelessly to gather evidence against members of the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club who were suspected of orchestrating this deadly attack. The investigation quickly became complex as police scrambled to piece together evidence while also grappling with public outrage over such brazen criminality.
The public level of pressure meant that there was $500,000 reward offered by the government for any information about who might have put both these men in their graves, which was at the time the highest reward ever offered.
And thus began the first bikie crackdown in Western Australia.
Police raids targeted known hangouts associated with club members across Perth, searching for any clues that could lead them closer to solving this case, shrouded in secrecy and fear.
But this was the first time we saw the dark underbelly of OMCG activity. Up until then, you kind of knew they existed.
During these raids, officers uncovered significant amounts of illegal drugs and firearms linked directly back to various members within the Gypsy Jokers ranks.
We've had a major act of terrorism in our suburbs. We've got to deal with it.
Raids on clubhouses and brick houses became an almost daily occurrence. Operation Zircon was looking for Don Hancock's killer or killers, and Avalon was targeting bikies and the Gypsy Jokers in general.
These discoveries led to 130 charges for drug trafficking and gun possession. In one raid, police found 3 kilograms of amphetamine and $363,000 in cash in the house of Lenny Kirby, the president of the Perth Gypsy Joker chapter.
Zycorn also led police to charge the president of the Gypsy Joker, Len Kirby, over a multi-million-dollar drug haul.
A breakthrough in the case came on September 4th, 2001, when Sid Snot Reed was arrested on unrelated drug charges in Fremantle.
And one man, during this activity, was scooped up in a very public arrest outside Perth's law courts in full view of public and gathered media. Sydney Snot Reed. He could have come from the outlaw motorcycle gang Central Casting Agency. Beard, flannel, ciggies, and dark, mean eyes. He was initially charged with illegal possession of an unlicensed F357 revolver. That added to existing charges of GBH following a boulder bashing involving a hammer and a baseball bat.
Detective John Jock Robertson, using traditional British police methods of confronting suspects head-on, managed to break Reed down and convince him to turn Crown's evidence. Robertson visited Reed almost every day at his house at 50 Weston Avenue, which had been bugged by the police. On February 14, 2002, Reed was arrested again, and after intense interrogation that lasted until 1:29 a.m. the next day, he finally confessed to his role in the Hancock murder. Reed's confession implicated Graham "Slim" Slater, a prominent figure within the Gypsy Jokers, as the mastermind behind both Grierson's murder and the subsequent car bombing targeting Hancock.
Reed did the unthinkable. He confessed, he admitted to planting the bomb, and he also pointed the finger at fellow Jokers, including one of his closest mates, Graham "Slim" Slater. Just days after that arrest, in an entirely secret court hearing, Reed pleaded guilty to the double murder and was sentenced to life with 15 years in prison to serve, the minimum that could be delivered under Western Australian law.
Reed also accused Gary White, another Gypsy Joker leader, of murdering a rival drug dealer, Anthony Tapley, in August 2001. However, The case against Slater was far from straightforward. When brought to trial in the fall of 2003, Slater was defended by Colin Lovett, a well-known lawyer from Melbourne described as a fearless, highly theatrical pleader. The prosecution's case relied heavily on Reed's testimony, which was presented via television rather than in person, a decision that may have undermined its impact on the jury. Slater had an alibi for the day of Hancock's murder, with his mother and sister testifying that he had been with them in Northam celebrating Father's Day.
Graham Slater, still a member of that gang, immediately denied anything to do with the Hancock car bombing after being fingered by his mate Snot Reed. He claimed he'd been at his mum's house in Northam sleeping off a hangover when the bomb had gone off.
Although the prosecution introduced evidence of phone calls made from Perth using Slater's wife's cell phone on the day in question, the emotional testimony from Slater's family members seemed to carry more weight with the jury. In a surprising turn of events, a letter written by Slater was discovered mid-trial, in which he asked a friend to commit perjury by falsely testifying that Reed had been expelled from the Gypsy Jokers a day or two before he got arrested. While this revelation could have been damaging to Slater's case, his defense team managed to explain it away as the desperate actions of a wrongly accused man. On October 30th, 2003, the jury returned their verdict. Graham Slater was acquitted of the charges related to Hancock's murder. The jury had not found Sid Reed to be a credible witness for the Crown, and the prosecution had failed to prove Slater's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict left many, including Elizabeth Hancock, deeply devastated and shocked. Years have passed since the events surrounding the Hancock case unfolded, but the impact of this violent saga continues to resonate throughout Western Australia and beyond. The case raised profound questions about the nature of justice, the power of outlaw motorcycle clubs, and the thin line between law enforcement and criminality. Don Hancock, once revered as one of Australia's most respected policemen, left behind a complex legacy. While many still defend his character and question his involvement in Grierson's death, others point to his ruthless reputation and the circumstantial evidence that implicated him in the shooting.
However, it would appear that Don Hancock was not as squeaky clean as he was made out to be and was involved in various infamous and at times controversial incidents, and there were rumours that he was corrupt and had murdered at least 2 people before he died in 2001.
The coroner's inquest on April 21, 2006, led by Alistair Hope, ultimately ruled that Grierson's death was a murder committed by persons unknown, stating that while there was a significant body of evidence which suggests Mr. Hancock may have been the shooter, it was not overwhelming enough to definitively name him as the killer. The Gypsy Jokers, despite the arrests and convictions that followed Operation Zircon, managed to maintain their presence and influence in Western Australia. The brutal efficiency with which they carried out their revenge against Hancock served as a chilling reminder of the power and reach of outlaw motorcycle clubs. The case highlighted the challenges law enforcement faces in dealing with these organizations, whose code of silence and loyalty often proves impenetrable to traditional investigative methods. For the families of those involved, the wounds inflicted by this violent chapter in Western Australia's history may never fully heal. Nicole Scarry, Billy Grierson's girlfriend who was pregnant with his child at the time of his death, fought tirelessly for a coroner's inquest in the hope of finding some closure. Her son, Isaac, grew up never knowing his father.
Those gathered at that funeral heard of a fun-loving, affable man who was the youngest of 14 children of a Victorian war veteran. Grierson was a mechanic who worked on mine sites around Kalgoorlie, a father of 2 and divorced from their mother, which had prompted the connection with the Gypsy Jokers, and a father-to-be, with his partner Nicole 22 weeks pregnant.
Similarly, Brad Lewis, the son of Lou Lewis, spoke of the enduring pain of losing his father in such a senseless act of violence. The Hancock case also had lasting effects on the community of Ora Banda. The once quiet outback town found itself thrust into the national spotlight, its reputation forever altered by the violence that unfolded there. The Ora Banda Inn, which had stood since 1911 as a symbol of the area's gold rush history, was ultimately destroyed by fire on May 17, 2019, marking the end of an era and serving as a final tragic footnote to this tumultuous period.
A pub, the Ora Banda Inn, which was built from stone and brick in 1911.
As part of his plea bargain, Sid Reed was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was provided with cash, a Sony PlayStation, and allowed conjugal visits with his common-law wife, Natasha Moutinho.
He forced Detective Capehorn to reveal what sweets and treats he was given in prison. A TV, an Xbox for his cell, cash payments, snacks, cigarettes, and these visits from his girlfriend paid for by the state.
Reed was released from prison in 2018. Graham Slater was convicted of arson for burning down Hancock's Ora Banda house in 2000 and made a plea bargain with the Crown, pleading guilty to the arson charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. As time passes, the Hancock case continues to captivate the public imagination, spawning books, documentaries, and even a 6-part television series in 2022 titled Bikie Code, Murder, Revenge, and the Gypsy Jokers. It serves as a stark reminder of the potential for violence that lurks beneath the surface of even the most seemingly peaceful communities. The case raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice, revenge, and the cyclical nature of violence. In the end, the full truth of what happened on that fateful night in Ora Banda may never be known. The key players in this drama, Hancock, Grierson, and many others, have taken their secrets to the grave. What remains is a cautionary tale about the consequences of vengeance and the high cost of seeking justice outside the bounds of the law. The Hancock case stands as a dark chapter in Australian history, a reminder of the fragile nature of peace and the enduring impact of violence on individuals, families, and entire communities.